Today we're talking about the exercises from Chapter 8, so we're looking at questions number 1 through 4 on page 158 of your Writing Arguments textbook that covers the passages on pages 157 and 158. Our first question asks us, how do the strategies of persuasion differ in these two passages? When we look at passage 1, the first strategy we see used most obviously is kairos. The author brings up the term kairos, defines it, explains how it has been important, and claims that this is the kairotic moment for action. You will probably never see another argument that takes one of the classical appeals and uses it so explicitly. This passage also appeals to ethos. We can look at the author's credentials here. The author is a reverend and has a PhD. But we can also see within the text of the argument that the author appeals to the Bible, the New Testament in particular. They are appealing to the Bible as a source for authority, as a source that this writer expects his readers to agree with and to trust. We also have appeals to pathos, with a few words that have an emotional connection. For example, the author associates kairos with deliverance and salvation. In a religious context, these words are very important, but the author is here implying that it is just as important for people to act on climate change in order to achieve deliverance or salvation, making the action seem even more important. Finally, this author appeals to logos near the end of the argument. He claims the kairos moment has arrived and asks, how long will it endure until the time of decisive action to bring about deliverance comes, or more ominously, until the time when opportunity for decisive action has passed us by. So what he's saying here is that when you have a problem, you need to act on it in the right time, or you'll lose the opportunity to act on it. There are some things that you must fix, or you will no longer have the chance to fix them. And we can logically agree with that reasoning. We are familiar with problems that require action within a certain time frame if action is to be completed. Passage 2 appeals to kairos indirectly. Passage 2 is addressing global warming, the same as Passage 1, and we know this is a current issue, so they don't have to tell us that it's a current problem. They are a lot less insistent on now being the absolute time to act, so they don't appeal to kairos as strongly as the first argument. They appeal to ethos by giving their own motivation for making this argument. They want to transition to a clean energy economy in a just and equitable way. By saying that they value justice and equity, they are presenting themselves as ethically good. They have good motivations for making their argument, and we should believe them because they are good people who have these good qualities. This passage makes many logical appeals by explaining the possible benefits of undertaking the actions they propose. For example, creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs and generating billions of dollars in capital investment, and offsetting higher energy costs, and generating revenue that will allow efficient technologies, etc. So they use a lot of logic to explain what benefits will follow from the actions they propose. They also make a few emotional appeals to pathos, by using some loaded words. The appeal to justice and equity may be counted as an appeal to pathos as well as an appeal to ethos, if that is something that makes people feel inspired. We also have a few other words, like bold. Bold is another word for brave. So they are implying that we have to be willing, we have to be brave enough to take these steps so that we can have the benefits. They also also use some good adjectives later on that help people feel involved. So we have the words quickly, cleanly, cheaply, and safely here, which are all things that people like. We like our technology to be quick, clean, cheap, and safe. So we are appealing a little bit to pathos in this way. It's not very explicit, it is very subtle, but it can create an emotional connection with the reader. So the differences we see between these two passages are that the first one depends very explicitly on kairos and quite highly on ethos, while the second passage focuses much more on logic. It appeals more strongly, more consistently, and more frequently to logic and reasoning than to any of the other appeals. So if we look at the target audience and original genre for these two different passages, how might that explain the differences? Well, the first passage is an editorial, the beginning of an editorial from a magazine called Creation Care, a Christian Environmental Quarterly. If we're familiar with magazines, we know you usually get an editorial at the beginning that is written by the editor of the magazine that talks generally about the subject the magazine covers. We can see that here because the author doesn't give us any real information about why now is the time, or what we should do if we agree that now is the time to act. This may come further in the editorial, but it's also possible that he's just encouraging us to read the articles in the magazine, which will explain why it's so important to act now, what's at stake, and what kinds of actions people can take if they agree that now is the time to act. He appeals very strongly to kairos, so he is getting people revved up with a sense of urgency, and he also appeals very strongly to ethos in the form of the New Testament, which is what we expect from a Christian environmental quarterly. If they are targeting themselves specifically at both an environmentalist and Christian audience, they'll need to appeal to the shared values their audience holds, which includes believing in the Bible as a source of authority. The second passage is speaking to a more general audience. They have less assurance that they can appeal to a certain religious group or value system. But if you look closer, they do reveal what values they are appealing to. We have multiple places where they are indicating that they can help less fortunate people. We are going to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We are going to maximize these benefits across all sectors of our society. And we are going to use public assets for public benefit programs. This includes financial assistance for low and moderate income consumers and workers. And we're going to assist in communities vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So as you can see, we are looking at low and moderate income groups and vulnerable communities. They're appealing to the values of helping the less fortunate. This is possibly what you would expect from a more liberal source, and also for one that is looking at a more general audience. So they're looking more at focusing on what actions can be taken and what benefits those actions will have. And they look at quite a few benefits so they can be sure to find benefit that's going to appeal to any group of readers. We also notice that this is a website, so it's something that they expect people to come across if maybe they're searching, if they're not necessarily a member of the Sierra Club, but they're searching for information, like what can we do about global warming. So they're targeting a fairly general audience. Question 3 asks us, how effective is each argument for its intended audience? When I discuss these with classes, we usually agree that each argument would be pretty effective for its intended audience. We believe that passage 1 is going to appeal pretty strongly to Christians who already believe in environmentalism, and it is a pretty stirring speech, especially if you already know what you can do and why it is actually time to act now. We also say passage 2 is probably going to be pretty appealing to its original audience, which might be members of the Sierra Club or people who are doing searches for global warming policy solutions. Both of these are pretty effective for their intended audiences. So what about number 4? Do we think either argument would be effective for readers outside of the intended audience? Most people usually say that passage 1 probably won't be very effective for other audiences. But consider a couple of audiences that it may be effective for. For example, what about Christians who are not yet interested in environmentalism? It's possible that this passage might be inspiring to them when they learn about the concept of kairos, and maybe they might decide that it is time to be concerned about the environment. It might also appeal to people who are not Christians, but who are already environmentalists, who might agree that it is in fact time to act on this issue. They might be glad to have this term kairos brought in to confirm their feelings and to help them explain their reasoning to other people. If you notice, while this passage does appeal to the New Testament, it brings in the concept of kairos, which is not a religious concept. This is a Greek term. We use it because of its relevance in rhetoric that the author could have cited from a different source if he had chosen to. The fact that the dependence on kairos does not depend on believing in elements of the religion might make this passage more believable for people of other religions, because they don't have to agree with the actual premises of the religion to understand the concept of kairos or to believe that it is an important concept. Most students believe that passage 2 would be effective for readers outside of the intended audience. It is very broad and very ambitious. It has a lot of promises. It makes a lot of promises that most people would probably find encouraging, even if some of us might want a little bit more information on how the actions would actually lead to the consequences. It might especially be interesting to people who think that environmentalism is something that rich people can be concerned about but poor people cannot be concerned about, because it does talk about the benefits that low-income people can get from environmental legislation and practices. It also gives benefits for people who are rich, so generating billions of dollars in capital investment. So it gives a little something for all sections of the population here. As you can see from these two passages, arguments use rhetorical strategies, and they do so depending on what audience they are targeting. It's important for us to understand these appeals so that we can make our own arguments effective for whatever audience we are targeting, as well as so that when we read other people's arguments, we can tell what they're doing. That can help us choose whether we believe them or not by understanding how they are trying to work on us, how they are trying to appeal to our sense of authority and ethics, our reasoning and logic, and our emotions, as well as invoking the concept of kairos to make us feel a sense of urgency.